We got the numbers in for the domestic box office this last weekend, and so far it's actually showing an interesting sign to studios that they don't need to invest a ton of money in movies in order for them to be successful. Right now we got Paw Patrol, which is at the number one spot, and it currently got $23 million domestically on a $30 million budget, so it's not necessarily profitable as it is right now, and it still needs to make in total globally around $75-80 million in order to be considered a success. But at the same time, I mean, $23 million is a good start. And then when you consider that the first movie in this franchise got around $140 million globally, it's looking like this one will be another profit for the studio that made it. And then you got Saw 10, which is obviously the 10th one in the franchise, or no, I think it's the 11th one, or does it count Jigsaw? I forget how they count them or whatever, but yeah, Saw 10, and that got around $18 million domestically that it brought in on a $13 million budget. And I think this is also a good thing for studios to look at when it comes to franchise movies, because when you look at the other Saw movies in the franchise, you can see it's like, yeah, this one's opening up below pretty much all the other ones except for Spiral, which that kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people, and then Jigsaw. But at the same time, the studios probably looked at the box office total for these movies and realized, like, okay, we can expect to maybe get around $100 million out of a Saw movie. So instead of giving it a $50 million budget where you need to make like $125 million in order to succeed, they're figuring like, okay, well, we can get about $100 million out of this. So just give it a modest $13 million budget, and that should be enough to actually turn a hefty profit. I mean, yeah, look at the first movie, like $1.2 million just to make the first one right there. I mean, yes, that was just a one-room movie basically, but at the same time, it's like the studio who made this understood like what they can get for it. So you're not seeing like certain things like what we saw with movies like, let's say, Ant-Man, where the first movie they spent $130 million on it, and they're like, okay, yeah, I got a few $100 million, so it was a success. So then when you get to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumanium, they're like, okay, we can expect to make around $300-400 million out of an Ant-Man movie, so let's give this one a $300 million budget. It's like, I don't know why you would do that personally. I think that's a pretty ridiculous idea. They should have taken into consideration, like, okay, this is how much we can make for it. Like, all the Marvel movies don't have to be made with the same huge budgets. I mean, you can make a cheaper movie. Like, certain characters are more popular than other characters, so the less popular ones you give a cheaper budget to and do with what you will to it. But it just seems to be making the most sense for me from a business standpoint. But apparently the studio executives who are the business side don't understand that aspect of it, or maybe I'm missing something here. I don't know, but that just doesn't seem like it makes too much sense. But the one movie I was really curious about this last weekend was Gareth Edwards, The Creator. And it says it had a $14 million domestic opening, but $32.3 million globally, which it seems like it's not a ton for a movie of the scope that it was. But I mean, keep in mind, this is only an $80 million movie. And when you look at some of the stills from this movie, I mean, this doesn't seem like an $80 million movie. It seems like it costs significantly more for this type of movie. And I think a lot of this is credited to the fact that Gareth Edwards actually knows how to handle VFX. If you look at his first feature film that he directed, Monsters, that was made for like $500,000. And you can see, I mean, it looks like it doesn't look like an expensive movie, but I mean, it looks like it cost several million to make, but he understood how to actually do the effects. He did a lot of the effects himself, and he understands how to stretch it. And even if he's the one not personally handling it this way, I mean, by understanding the process, he knows how to make the most of it. And instead of doing something that we're seeing with a lot of the Marvel stuff, we're like, yeah, let's just slap green on everything and then just figure it out later. And if we want to change stuff around. It's like, no, the studio gave him a decent budget for this, but nothing so expensive where this needs to make like $1 billion in order to be considered a success. So they give him a modest budget and let him have more creative say-so in this. And then that means there's less of the back and forth between him and the studios, less of the editing process to it. And they don't have to switch stuff around, which means it saves them a lot of money. And I think more studios should do this, not only having things planned out ahead of time, what they're actually going to do, but actually try to, just give control to the directors, the creatives behind it. Because when you get something like Marvel, where they're trying to appeal to everyone, what happens is the studios have too many notes and things that they have to change around and tweak stuff. And that's why you get a lot of these delays and reshoots and all that jazz, because they need to make it appeal to everyone in order to be considered profitable for them. And that's why it ultimately is we're seeing these box office failures, because there's nothing that they're making that appeals to everyone, versus something like The Creator. It might not appeal to everyone, but it's from what I've gathered, it's decently received amongst audiences. Right now, these early projections for it was saying it would needed to make around, or it was projecting around $15 to $25 million. So I think that's domestic. So yeah, domestic. So that's not the greatest considering they made $14 million. But it does point out though, it made around 80 million, or it was made for around 80 million, and it needs to make, or it's predicting from this, it needs to make around $280 million, or it expecting to make around that much. And with the budget that they had, it probably needs to make around 200. And I'm actually hoping that they do succeed in this one. I mean, a lot of that is also going to come down to word of mouth, because when you get these original IPs like this, audiences aren't sure how to receive it. So they're going to wait for word of mouth. And if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, I mean, it's decent, nothing great, but I mean, maybe decent is enough to actually bring people to the theaters. I'm curious what the second weekend is going to be for this, if it's going to have a steep drop off or not, if it's just going to be DOA, if it does have a huge drop off. But I mean, if it has a strong hold, then I can see this definitely making its money back. And that could signal to studios like, hey, maybe people are more interested in original IPs. Don't give them huge budgets, just original IPs in the hands of competent directors, and then we'll see success. But maybe that's just my wishful thinking. Realistically, the studios see this succeed, and they'll be like, oh, that means we need to, if this makes, let's say, if it did make $300 million, they're like, oh, this movie was a success. Let's make a second movie to the creator, and then give it a $300 million budget or something like that. That's probably what the message I'll take away from it. But I mean, I think maybe I'm holding out hope that they'll do the smart thing and actually realize like, hey, we need to have more original stuff with actual competent directors at the helm making it. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath for something like that to happen. But one thing is for sure, if this movie doesn't succeed, it'll just tell studios like, yeah, people don't want original content. People want to see more sequels on those high budgets. So let's make more sequels with those high budgets. And I don't think that really is good for anyone. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. And if you like this video, make sure you click that like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with the latest news. Thank you.